You're listening to Big World Network.
Evolution, Episode 1. Written and read by Charles Eads. Now, boy, show the nice man like you showed me. Go on. The manager stood behind glass and watched as the primate glanced around, dark eyes uncomprehending. Go on now. The woman in the white coat was visibly nervous. Though she couldn't see him on the other side, the manager had a reputation. She crouched to the ape's level and made a strange gesture with her hands, raising them up and down, turning the palms from floor to ceiling. The ape looked from her to the steel balls scattered around the floor, its gaze wandering. Then it slowly cocked its head, eyeing the balls with something like concentration, a frown appearing on its solemn face. One of the balls began to move. It trembled, shifted on the floor, and then rose completely, ascending up above the heads of those watching. The others gradually followed, until 5 silver balls hung suspended in the air. The ape yawned and scratched itself. Its attention wandered elsewhere, but the balls stayed where they were, still and peaceful. The young woman clapped her hands, looking at the glass with a smile. The manager's expression did not change. The young woman approached the glass and pressed a button on the wall, her voice emanating through speakers. As you can see, Subject 7 has reached a very advanced stage. His relaxed state in performing such a monumental task shows that, to him, it is as simple as tying a shoelace. He is one of only 3 subjects to reach this level. The manager nodded. Continue with your work. He turned and walked away down the corridor. 3, yes. Only 2 of which were this cooperative. Okay, we're in. Quiet now. The laboratory was almost impregnable, a fortress. But like the best of them, it had one weak spot. After months of planning, the activists had found it. Now 2 of their best, codenamed Q and A, snuck in through the backyard. It was used for disposal of waste products, of which there were many from a laboratory this big, but was not heavily guarded due to the overpowering smell. Q and A wore masks as they crept through, keeping low in case of stray guards and security cameras. The doors were locked and could only be opened by security key cards. All the staff had one, except the one Q had seduced in a pub the previous week. One swipe, and they were in. Which way now? A asked. Look for the blue signs. The corridors were color-coded, this much they knew. A hacker friend had found an online map system which they had both memorized. Their torches searched the ceiling and walls as they moved through the empty corridors. Here, this way, Q said. Watch out for cameras. The same hacker had also identified all the places containing security cameras and told them where to be careful. Not that they needed to worry. At this time of night, the man on watch in the CCTV room was never at his most alert. I think this is it. Q swiped the card again, and the steel doors slid open. They crept into a vast room lined with glass chambers. Behind each of the glass walls were animals. Dogs, cats, birds, apes, reptiles, all were represented save fish and insects. Some were asleep, some weren't. All were deathly silent. Here we are, you beauty. A crouched by a steel panel set into the wall and took a screwdriver from the bag around his neck. Q stood looking through one glass window. The ape was inside, awake and watching her calmly. The interior of the small room was bare, no bars or material. Why do they keep them behind glass instead of cages? She said. "Who knows what these creeps are up to?" said A, exchanging screwdriver for scissors, and getting to work on the wires behind the panel. Q laid her hand against the glass, while the ape gazed back at her, its dark eyes meeting hers. "What have they done to you?" The ape turned its gaze elsewhere, toward the cell next to it. Q felt something come over her. It was a strange feeling, as if some presence were tugging at the back of her mind. She moved almost automatically from the ape cell to the next one, the feeling growing stronger with each step she took. At first she thought the cell was empty, but then she saw a wooden perch was set into the back wall, and on it sat a raven. It looked at her unblinkingly, and she looked back, eye to eye. Q felt a stirring in her stomach, almost sickly. It was as if the raven was not just looking at her, but looking into her. "Adam, just a minute." There was a spark, and A leapt back as the wires flared. The lights flickered for a moment and then went out. They heard a loud clank, a whirring, and then the doors to every cell slowly swung open. Alarms sounded, red whirring lights piercing the darkness. Q stood very still. Nothing moved, and more confusingly, none of the animals made a sound. Then she caught a movement at the edge of her vision. A dog walked out before her, and stood looking straight at her. It was a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, solid and strong, flashing lights bringing out the bright orange of its coat. It stood alert, ears up, watching her. Like the raven, it seemed to scrutinize her carefully, its mind working. Q slowly lowered herself to the dog's level and put out her hand, fingers extended. "It's all right," she said. "I won't hurt you." The dog growled. "Good boy." It opened its mouth, and instead of a bark, a wave of fire flared out and hit her straight in the face. Q was knocked on her back, screaming as the flames licked at her clothes. The dog strode up to her, almost casually. It looked down at her with eyes far too intelligent for any dog. Its mouth gaped and bathed her in fire. "Queenie!" A ran, but before he could reach her, something came flying out of one of the cages and knocked him over. He fell on his back and felt claws pierce his flesh. He opened his mouth to scream, but the creature had already sunk its teeth into his face. The dog stood by the burning girl unconcernedly and looked up. The raven now sat on the rafters, surveying the room. Other animals came out of the cages warily. The dog pricked up its ears and looked towards the exit. Boots sounded in the corridor outside, and a group of guards came running in. They had guns. The raven flapped its wings and disappeared into the rafters as the guards halted a short distance from the animals. The ape was the first to react. It lifted a paw, and 2 guards in the front went flying back through the air. The others raised their guns, taking aim. Then one of them began to tremble. He felt as if something had strolled into his brain and taken control. He was aware of everything, but someone else was making the decisions. Helpless behind his own eyes, he felt himself turning to face the other guards, saw his gun pointing towards them. "Hey, what the hell are you—" His finger pressed the trigger. Too surprised to return fire, the other guards were shot down where they stood. When none were left, the guard slowly raised the gun and pressed it to his own head. He looked up with difficulty and saw the raven looking down at him, its steady gaze piercing right into him. The gun went off, and he fell without a sound. The dog strode up to the bodies, eyed them with distaste, and for good measure lit them up with one breath, leaving them to burn. In the corner, the most independent-minded sheep in the world was gazing curiously at a brick wall. It opened its mouth, and a shrill whine pierced the air. The other animals squirmed in discomfort at the overpowering noise. The wall in front of the sheep vibrated, cracks spreading all over it, until finally it shattered, leaving a gaping hole. The sheep closed its mouth and shook itself, then trotted out over the rubble. The dog followed, then the raven, flying away into the night, and all the others in quick procession. Soon the room was empty, save for the bodies of the victims, lying amid rapidly spreading fire. Within hours the whole laboratory was alight. Fire engines fought the flames, their sirens piercing the air as jets of water sprayed the ruined building. The manager stood far back and watched the inferno. Another staff member came up to him, flustered and unwashed. Like most of them, he had been summoned from his bed. "The police are here, and the press," he said. "They're asking questions. I can't put them off forever. And the subjects? What men we have left are out looking for them." The manager's glasses reflected the fire, his face expressionless. "We have to shut it down." "Come again." "Shut everything down. If this gets out, we're finished." "Sir, the subjects will have to be destroyed." "Yes." He waited, expecting more. When the manager said nothing, he turned and walked away, taking his phone out for what would be the first of many calls. The manager, now that he was alone, removed his glasses and wiped away tears.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.